So tell us who you are, what you do, your role at the seminary, and then you can go straight into how you first met Bill Weber.
I'm Bill Weisenbach. I was a music major in college and student taught junior high school brass and percussion, which quickly made me decide that I really didn't want to be a music teacher. And I applied to New York Theological Seminary. Actually, I applied on a biblical seminary in New York application because the official name change did not occur until the summer preceding my arrival. Mm-hmm. It was then quite a small school. Almost all the students were residential, and all the students, meaning like 35 or 40. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of vacant space in the building. And the Methodist Church had given money to develop programs for the practicing clergy in the city to train them in urban ministry. It was called MUST, Metropolitan Urban Service Training Facility. And when they began, they leased an entire floor of the seminary as their headquarters and invited Bill Weber to be the head of that organization, with Randy Nugent, also another NYTS graduate, as the co-director. Randy went on to become the head of the mission unit of the Methodist Church in America. In 1968, it became clear that financially the seminary could not survive as it was going, and decided to find a new president. John Sutherland Bunnell had been the interim president, the former minister of Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church. And several people on the faculty then, significantly Niall Harper, started talking to Bill Weber about whether or not he wouldn't like to take over this, what seemed like a sinking ship, and do something really creative along the lines of MUST, the urban service training program that he was already involved with. And Bill was finally persuaded and made himself a candidate. I happened to be the president of the student body that my senior year, and I organized the students behind Bill's candidacy. He participated in a number of seminary activities and was a chapel speaker. And so people had gotten to know him. I'd gotten to know him. And he was elected the incoming president of the seminary and began actually in March of 1969. So he signed my diploma in May of 1969 as the president for 2 months. When he was at MUST, this is an aside, apparently everyone in the East Harlem Protestant parish, Bill's prior job was a faculty member at Union Seminary and one of the founding persons in the East Harlem Protestant parish. And he would wear gray work shirts with collar taken off and a clergy collar put on. Apparently all of the ministers of the East Harlem Protestant parish would wear these work shirts as a kind of a symbol of their wanting to be with the people. Anyway, once he became the president of the seminary, he stopped doing that. And he found out that I was planning to go on to continue on and do a Master of Sacred Theology that the seminary had started along with the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health in New York, a 2-year part-time STM. And he asked me what I was going to do with the rest of my time. And I said I hadn't a clue. And so he offered me the job of being his assistant for the sum of $4,000 a year, plus a free apartment next door. And so I took it. And for the next 2 years, Bill gave me all kinds of assignments while we began what was going to be a make it or break it year for the MDiv program. Mm-hmm. And he brought in a couple of new faculty members and raised money from a host of foundations, but all of whom said, as this seminary cannot survive on these kinds of gifts. This is a one-time thing. And at a point in time, I think in the middle of the spring semester, it was clear that the seminary could not continue as it was and needed to make radical changes, and decided to help all of the MDiv students find another way of completing their degree program, which we ultimately did with New Brunswick Seminary, and to put all of its energy into STM programs in urban ministry and pastoral counseling and all those kinds of areas. It was agreed that all the faculty would submit a letter of resignation.
Wow.
And that we would, and they did, and that we would seek a buyer for the library. And so I remember vividly, one of my early assignments was to draft a memo about how we might sell the seminary library. And there was a gathering of students, and my document was distributed. And Bill looked at it and he said, in a very stern voice, "This is absolutely unacceptable." And I was just mortified. And he said, "There's no date." There's no date. So everybody wrote a date on it, and everything I had recommended actually occurred, and the library was ultimately sold for not very much money, but someone willing to come and pack it up to the Biblical Seminary in Philadelphia, fundamentalist operation, which I think is still may still be going on. Apparently, I had proven my value to the school, and when I finished the STM, I was offered a faculty position and a full-time job. And I worked as Bill's assistant then for another 2 years, at which time I was, for all intents and purposes, the COO of the school, and I was given the title vice president. So when Bill wasn't there, I was responsible for this. And that also involved supervising we had a building manager because we had a 13-story building with all these rooms that were rented out and other not-for-profit organizations that were a part of it. At a point in time, Bill would take vacation in August, I would take it in July and rent his cottage in Sorrento, Maine for my vacation. So I would be there for the month of July, and then he and his family would take over in September. And that went on for a number of years. And it didn't take long after I met Bill that he became a mentor of mine in every sense of the word. He really gave me a whole new way of thinking about what the gospel was about and what its responsibilities were to other people and to justice in this world. We painted a dove on the ceiling of the seminary so that helicopters would see it. It said "Peace Now." I think Bill was famously remembered for being handcuffed to draft resistors and being arrested before he came to the seminary. But I mean, he was always putting his body where his mouth was. And if there was a word I would use to characterize him, it was that he was authentic in every sense of the word. What you saw was what you got.
What do you think drove him to have such passion for justice, right? It was so evident that he was named, right, a prophet for the cause of justice.
I don't know that he ever said outright. You know, he served in the Navy. He was a petty officer, I believe, in the Navy. And in fact, when we would have faculty retreats, which we did, the way Bill organized the faculty, we had a Bible study every week on Wednesday. People were expected to be in their offices at least 4 days a week, so that a community was formed. And we would go on these retreats where everybody on the faculty would take walks with everybody else and talk about what worked for their relationship and what didn't, and so forth and so on. And in the evening, somebody, usually me, would have brought a bottle of scotch or a bottle of bourbon. And Bill would have a little bourbon. It's the only time he ever did it, not drank, I don't know how often he drank, but the only time he ever talked about his service in the Navy. And he would start telling Navy stories about storms and about the way this, I think it was an escort that he was on. It was a smaller ship, and it would rock. It would rock in ways that an aircraft carrier would turn over if it ever did it. But these things would pitch like 30 or 35 feet, and being on the officer and being sick as a dog and knowing he had to stand his watch irrespective of how he felt. And I don't know whether that experience, the fear that came with all that, I really have no idea, but you could hear the fear and the excitement in his voice when he would tell those old stories. But early on, Bill was a guy who really had genuine friendships in the Black community, like most people did not. What brought him to the idea of forming the East Harlem Protestant Parish and living on subsistence income and moving into city housing in East Harlem and staying there even long after he became the president and made a real salary, and Dibby Weber, his wife, became an executive with the United Church of Christ and made a lot of money. They still stayed in this apartment deep in the heart of East Harlem. And Tommy also lived in the same building on the floor above after he had married. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I just know that he was always there. When it came to racial issues, he got on board with feminist issues long before most people caught on. One of the tenants we moved into the building were the Environmental Action Coalition. This is going back to like 1970, one of the earliest movements in the whole ecological movement. And, that Bill had welcomed into the building. So it was just on every front you can imagine a need for justice. Bill was there. And he was so, what's the word? Cheap for himself. He mail ordered his shoes and his pants. And he told me, that his shoes didn't last long. They would begin to rot. And I said, that's because you have to have at least 2 pair so that you can alternate them and let them dry out. You just can't wear the same pair of Oxford shoes every day. And his desk chair, this is the president of the seminary, and his desk chair had these splits, the plastic or leather had split. And so he just would tape them up with Scotch tape. Eventually, I think I got him duct tape, which he really took to, and he would duct tape them. And I was, well, let's just get a new chair. It's been long enough. But he would say, he often said, if we can do this 95% of the way for half the cost, let's do it that way, which I think in some ways is part of the reason the seminary has survived all these years. As Gay Wilmore described it, we are an unapologetically no frills institution.
What for people like me who've never had the honor to meet him, right? And most of our networks right now at NYTS, students and friends who have never met him, what would you want us to know about this man, right? Other than his accomplishments and his work at NYTS, what do you think is important for us to grasp about him?
Well, as I said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
he really was so authentic. He made you want to be.
Hmm.
He just if he's yeah, he just made you want to be a better person, to be a more just person,
Hmm.
uh, to think about um, the common good in a new way, uh, which means to think about the less fortunate person in most cases. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's if we could each do that, right? For a handful of people in our lives,
yeah, yeah,
right?
he was, and I mean his pat. Well, it's kind of obvious. He did a great job of turning the institution around, and
Mm-hmm.
then we invited New Brunswick to host its courses in our space and to allow us to supplement their curriculum with some of ours. So we did that MDiv, and then one day, Keith was the president-elect. Bill Weber and Keith and myself were invited to the Harvard Club by the president of New Brunswick Seminary
Mm-hmm.
for a conversation, and their dean and their vice president also. So there were 6 of us. Now they knew that we had previous to this, with New Brunswick's concurrence, decided we wanted to do a truly shared MDiv program.
Mm-hmm.
We would do half of it, they would do half of it. The degree would be theirs, but that we would hire a dean, since most of the students were New Yorkers, who would reside at the seminary, and that it would be a shared cost, and that it would need to be a person of significant weight. And so we had all agreed on this, and so we began searching. When we got to the Harvard Club, it was announced that their faculty was insisting that their newest faculty member be named that dean. And I'm blocking on his name. I'm blocking on his name. It'll come to me. Um, he had done his dissertation at Union. I almost had it. On the East Harlem Protestant parish, in which he characterized it as a plantation. And I never saw Bill more wounded. He was just devastated. Benjamin Alisea was his name.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Alisea, was a friend of ours, was an adjunct teacher of ours when he was doing his PhD. We helped get him the job at New Brunswick Seminary, and he went there. But as far as we were concerned, Ben was certainly no candidate to be the dean of this cooperative program.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Bill finally saw the dissertation, he was just so wounded by it that there wasn't a chance in hell that that we were about to have Ben Alisea move into the building, who really thought that Bill was a plantation owner, and so they said, well, to us, well, our faculty is very clear. It has to be Ben Alisea, and it's not negotiable. And we walked out of the door of the Harvard Club and stood under the awning. When Emily Gibbs was with us too, there were 4 of us. And I said to them, we can do this. We do not need New Brunswick to restart our MDiv program. And Keith, who would have had to bear the responsibility for all this, we all just started shaking our heads. Yes, we can do this. And notified New Brunswick that we were terminating our relationship with them, since they had insisted on this, and we would be starting our own with Gayrod Wilmore as the first dean of the MDiv program.
Wow.
And Indeed, we got gay and had him from 82 to 87, I believe, 5 years. And I mean, it came back roaring, just
Yeah,
roaring.
yeah. No, that's an amazing story. I'm
Yeah.
glad you told it so we can have it on the records. Yeah. So tell me about the prophetic role that Bill Weber had. When he got his honorary doctorate from Yale, they called him a prophet for the cause of justice, right? How was he a prophet for the cause of justice?
Well, he was willing. Even at the cost of his own personal self, he was willing to stand up with others, beginning with the handcuffing of himself to draft resistors in the earlier 60s.
Mm-hmm.
The marches he attended, the people he would invite to be at the seminary and speak, his letters to the editor at the New York Times, always on the side of the needy, and his witness of his personal life, the modesty with which he lived his life, the way he would express gratitude for just about everything in his life. I remember once saying to him, I said, "Bill, all of your sons went to Harvard. Your daughter could have gone to Harvard. She didn't, but you must be so proud." And his eyes filled up with tears. And he said, "Oh, never proud, grateful."
Hmm. Wow.
And I've since applied that to my own life. You simply cannot take credit for all the good things that happen to you, especially with your own children. We all have friends whose children were raised with all the same privileges and all the same love, and yet somehow have gotten lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, of
Wow.
my own children, I always say I'm never proud. I'm grateful.
Yeah, wow. That's a wonderful, wonderful story. It captures the heart of the man
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.